It sometimes seems to me that spirituality should be our greatest reason for living a very joyful life. Even if we are opening in a very genuine way to the suffering of others, as indeed we need to be, that we could nevertheless sustain a life that is filled with generosity and gratitude and quite an excessive joy. If there can be an excessive joy, I'm not sure that there should be an excessive joy. I think there should just be joy in excess. But quite often we perceive the spiritual life, or we perceive the life that is somehow guided by our spiritual seeking, as one that might even be a little bit constricting, or a little bit dour, or a little bit serious, or a little bit earnest. So I guess that in choosing the theme for today, this theme of enthusiasm, I wanted to really make a plea that we would be daring, that we would be bold, that we would be courageous in the way that we think about life, that we think about our own gift of life, and particularly in the ways that we think about the gifts that are other people's lives. That we would bring to our spiritual growth and development a vision of life that hums, that sings, that is vibrant, that is deeply intelligent and sympathetic and empathic, but that is also joyful. And I ask this because I feel that it is from that place, from that rich, textured place where we will sometimes do things entirely wonderfully and sometimes we will do them entirely unwonderfully. But it is from that place, from that rich place, that we will also feel resourced enough to meet the moments of depletion, or the moments of grief, or the moments of confusion or suffering that will also come. Enthusiasm, the very word of it, invites us to a bigger picture. You know, quite naturally, we could be hugely enthusiastic. We only have to see the behavior of little children to know that we are born to be enthusiastic. And yet very often as we move through life, and particularly as we experience other people's inhibitions or ideas about how we ought to live, we cramp ourselves. We don't want to appear to be too enthusiastic, just in case this also makes us look silly. But actually the real silliness would be not to risk a massive amount of enthusiasm, because it is in and through our enthusiasm that we connect with what is happening. You know, there's a marvellous, marvellous poem, very short, from Hafiz, who always had something marvellous to say about absolutely everything. And he says this: "I am happy before I have a reason." And many of us move through life requiring that there should be a reason why we should be happy, rather than knowing that the reason is that we have this astonishing gift that we call life, and so does everyone else. And that if we can meet one another through this enthusiastic place, then we could truly connect. Then we could rejoice in each other's happinesses, and we could be truly present in each other's sorrows. So Hafiz says, "I am happy before I have a reason. I am filled with light even before the sky can welcome the sun or farewell the moon. Oh, dearest ones, we have been in love with God forever. What else could Hafiz do but dance?" Isn't that so wonderful? There is a teaching for life in this little poem, that if we could really just turn our thoughts towards what is enriching, what is sustaining, what is uplifting, And it has been that that has sustained our services through these 8 years. This invitation constantly, each month, renewed each month, that you would return your mind, your heart, your thinking, your regard, your comprehension to what is most sustaining. Not in order to ignore what is problematic and unjust in our world, but to be able to meet it from a steady place, from a generous place, from a heart that is willing to be engaged, because you know through your enthusiasm what engagement really means. This is not a new idea at all. There is a marvelous teaching in Paul's letter to the Philippians, which is very well known to you. And I'm just going to read a tiny part of it. It's known to many of you, whether or not your formation spiritually has been Christian or not, because it is one of those teachings that has entered our culture more generally, and yet we ignore it again and again. And why do we ignore it? I think we ignore it, and I haven't given it to you yet, but I'm going to. We ignore it because we are hesitant about enthusiasm. And this is a profound invitation to an enthusiastic way, not just of living, of being. Paul says, rejoice in the Lord always. And again I say, because he really wants to emphasize it, and again I say, rejoice. Let your richness of spirit be known to all. Not your judgments, not your criticism, not your dogma, not your boring ideas about how other people should live if you want them to live exactly as you do. Not any of that. Let your richness of spirit. Isn't that a marvelous way to talk about enthusiasm? Let your richness of spirit be known. And how would it be known? It would be known through your presence. And how would you cultivate this? How would you cultivate this, even knowing the sorrows of our world? Paul has more to say. He says, let no anxiety make its home in your heart. Meaning, and I feel this very strongly, meaning anxieties will come into our hearts, but we need to be cautious about letting them dominate our thinking. Instead of that, Paul says, sisters and brothers. Now, just that little phrase, sisters and brothers. So we are meeting one another on a very equal plane. Sisters and brothers. Whatever is true, whatever is worthy of reverence, whatever is good, whatever is holy, whatever is lovely to look at and beautiful to hear, everything that has virtue, and everything that deserves praise, let this be what fills your thinking. Imagine the world we would live in if we took that one bit seriously. Our hearts would be filled with the most enthusiastic gratitude and rejoicing. And the second point that I really want to make is that this would not be for our own sake only. This would also allow us to develop within ourselves a quality that the Buddhists define so exquisitely and so perfectly as sympathetic joy. And what that really means is that this enthusiasm would allow us also to share the joys of other people. And if that strikes you as an odd thing for me to bring forward, think how often we have a little shadow of resentment, as though there was a real limit of happiness to go around. And if someone else has rather too much, then would that mean that I would have rather too little? when in fact the opposite is true, that the more joy that we can take in other people's joy, the more happiness we can take in other people's happiness, the more gratitude we have for what benefits other people, the more we will also benefit. The happier we will be, the less anxiety can lodge itself in a permanent way in our hearts. So just to remind you again, spirituality itself, whatever you understand by that, the spiritual seeking that you are doing in your own way and alongside one another, can be, and indeed should be, for you, a source of joy, a source of energy, a source of happiness, a source of inspiration, as well as a source of the most profound consolation. My own enthusiasm for interfaith ministry came about in such a remarkable way, and I want to conclude by telling you this, that years ago, maybe 2001, I discovered that there was a course offered in Britain in something called interfaith ministry. And I was in England at the time, and when I saw that this course was offered, I suffered such a feeling of loss of that other life that I could have been living had I not come to Australia in 1983. Thought, if I was still living in England, this is what I could do. I could train as an interfaith minister. And why did I want to do that? Because for me, it was a calling to minister to people without any boundaries, without any distinction between faith backgrounds, without any distinction between gender, culture, race. My calling was to minister to the human family. So there was I in England thinking, oh, it will never happen in that particular way, even though I had for many years by then been giving retreats and writing from an interfaith perspective. And then I came back to Australia and I discovered that the Interfaith Seminary in the UK was in fact a branch of an interfaith seminary, which had been the very first interfaith seminary in New York, and that it didn't matter where you were in the world, you could enroll there. And I enrolled and I started to study in 2003 and was ordained in 2005, and in 2006, along with Jolyon and Ian, we began the services here, and with Kim's wonderful music and Heather's wonderful music from the very beginning. Now, there was huge enthusiasm in that beginning, and there has to be huge enthusiasm in all our beginnings, and very particularly when we're stepping somewhat outside the conventional path. But you know, it's often from outside that conventional path that enthusiasm can most easily be generated, because we are already saying that the conventions may not suit us best, that the unconventions may in fact be truly liberating. So I want to conclude with a poem from Rumi, which I believe expresses in a most marvelous way the enthusiasm of the unconventions. Define and narrow me, says Rumi, and you starve yourself of yourself. Nail me down in a box of cold words, and that box is your coffin. I do not know who I am. I am in astounded, lucid confusion. I am not a Christian. I am not a Jew. I am not a Zoroastrian. I am not even a Muslim. I do not belong to the land or to any known or unknown sea. Nature cannot own or claim me, and nor can heaven, nor can India, China, or Bulgaria. My birthplace is placelessness, my sign to have and to give no sign. You say you see my mouth, my ears, my nose. They are not mine. I am the life of life. I am that cat, this stone and no one. I have thrown duality away like an old dish rag. I see and know all times and worlds as one, always one. So what do I have to do to get you to admit who is speaking? Admit it and change everything. This is your own voice echoing off the walls of God. My enthusiasm that we would somehow reach a place of at least glimpsing that we belong to one another. That duality has its part, but it is only the very beginning of a story that leads us to know that we belong to one human and divine family, and that when we bow to one another, we bow to everything. Blessed be.